The rejection. Sarah Martinez had dreamed of becoming a Navy SEAL since she was 12 years old. Growing up in a small Texas town, she spent countless hours at the local shooting range with her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran who taught her that precision came from patience, not power. Every summer, while other kids played video games, Sarah practiced marksmanship until her hands ached and her eyes strained from focusing on distant targets. When she turned 18, Sarah enlisted in the Navy with one clear goal: to become the first woman to successfully complete basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. She excelled in every physical test, outperformed most of her male counterparts in swimming and endurance challenges, and maintained the highest academic scores in her class. Her instructors noted her exceptional mental toughness and natural leadership abilities. After 2 years of exemplary service as a naval special warfare combatant craft crewman, Sarah felt ready to submit her application for SEAL training. She had prepared meticulously, documenting every achievement, every commendation, and every skill she had mastered. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander James Walsh, had initially been skeptical of her abilities but had grown to respect her determination and competence. The application process was grueling. Sarah underwent months of additional physical and psychological evaluations. She passed every test with flying colors, often scoring in the top percentiles. Her peers and instructors expected her application to be approved without question. Sarah herself felt confident that her record spoke for itself. The rejection letter arrived on a cold December morning. Sarah read it 3 times, unable to believe the words on the page. The official reason cited concerns about unit cohesion and operational readiness in mixed-gender special operations teams. The letter was signed by Admiral Robert Sterling, head of Naval Special Warfare Command. Sarah felt her world crumble. Years of preparation, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication seemed meaningless. She had given everything to prove herself worthy, yet bureaucratic policies and outdated thinking had blocked her path. Her fellow sailors tried to console her, but their words felt hollow. Some suggested she consider other special operations roles, but Sarah knew those were consolation prizes, not the dream she had chased for so long. Lieutenant Commander Walsh called Sarah into his office the day after she received the rejection. He had fought for her application behind closed doors, he explained, but faced resistance from higher-ups who weren't ready to take what they saw as a risk. Walsh was frustrated by the decision and ashamed that politics had overruled merit. "Martinez," he said, looking directly at her, "this isn't over. I've seen a lot of sailors come through here, and you're among the best I've encountered. Don't let this break you. Sometimes the system needs to be pushed, and sometimes that takes time." Sarah appreciated his support, but the rejection had shaken her confidence. She began to question whether she had been fooling herself about her abilities. Maybe the evaluators had seen something she couldn't see in herself. Maybe she really wasn't cut out for the elite world of special operations. For weeks, Sarah went through the motions of her regular duties without her usual enthusiasm. She still performed well, but the fire that had driven her for years seemed dimmed. Her friends noticed the change and worried about her mental state. Some suggested she request a transfer to a different unit where she could start fresh, away from the constant reminder of her failed application. One evening, while cleaning her service weapon in the armory, Sarah overheard 2 senior petty officers discussing her situation. They spoke about her with respect, mentioning how her rejection had disappointed many people who had believed in her potential. One of them mentioned that Admiral Sterling would be visiting their base in 2 weeks for a Christmas inspection and ceremony. The conversation sparked something in Sarah. She realized she had been waiting for others to recognize her worth instead of demanding it herself. The rejection had been a setback, not a final verdict. If the system wouldn't acknowledge her abilities through paperwork and evaluations, perhaps she needed to demonstrate them in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Sarah began researching Admiral Sterling's background. She discovered that he was known for his old-school approach to military tradition and his belief that combat effectiveness should never be compromised for social progress. He had publicly stated that women in special operations roles would create unnecessary complications and risks. Sterling was also famous for his own marksmanship skills and often challenged junior officers to shooting competitions during his base visits. An idea began forming in Sarah's mind. It was risky and could potentially end her military career if it backfired, but it might also be her only chance to prove herself directly to the man who had rejected her application. She would need to create an opportunity to demonstrate her skills in a way that Sterling couldn't ignore or explain away. Sarah started spending extra time at the shooting range, honing her skills to an even sharper edge. She practiced in various weather conditions, including rain and wind, preparing for any scenario. Her grandfather had always told her that a true marksman could hit their target regardless of external conditions. Now, more than ever, she needed that wisdom to guide her. The plan she formulated was audacious. During Admiral Sterling's visit, she would find a way to challenge his assumptions about women in combat roles through a direct demonstration of her abilities. She knew it could be seen as insubordination, but she also knew that sometimes extraordinary circumstances required extraordinary actions. As the date of the Admiral's visit approached, Sarah felt a familiar sense of purpose returning. The rejection had wounded her pride and tested her resolve, but it hadn't destroyed her dream. Instead, it had taught her that sometimes you have to create your own opportunities when the system fails to provide them. She spent the final days before Sterling's arrival visualizing different scenarios and outcomes. Sarah knew she might only get one chance to prove herself, and she was determined not to waste it. The little girl who had learned to shoot in the Texas heat was still inside her, steady-handed and unwavering in her aim. The morning of Admiral Sterling's arrival, Sarah woke before dawn and headed to the shooting range for one final practice session. As she lined up her shots in the pre-dawn darkness, she whispered a promise to herself. Today would be the day she took control of her own destiny, regardless of what anyone else thought she deserved. The Christmas storm. Admiral Robert Sterling arrived at Naval Station Norfolk on December 23rd with his usual entourage of staff officers and security personnel. The base had been preparing for his visit for weeks, with every detail planned and rehearsed. Sarah watched from a distance as his convoy pulled through the main gate, her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness about the plan she was about to execute. The morning inspection went smoothly, with Sterling reviewing troops and facilities according to his rigid schedule. Sarah participated in the formal ceremonies, standing at attention while the Admiral walked past her unit. When his eyes briefly met hers, she felt a jolt of determination. This man had decided her fate based on policy rather than ability, and today she would show him the error in that judgment. After the inspection, Sterling was scheduled to tour the base's training facilities, including the shooting range where Sarah had spent countless hours perfecting her skills. Lieutenant Commander Walsh had mentioned to Sarah that the Admiral often enjoyed demonstrating his own marksmanship abilities during these visits, sometimes challenging junior officers to friendly competitions. As the tour group approached the shooting range, the weather began to deteriorate rapidly. Dark clouds had been gathering all morning, and the first snowflakes started falling just as Sterling's group entered the facility. The range master, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, began explaining the facility's capabilities while Sterling examined the various weapons available for demonstration. "Admiral," Rodriguez said with practiced deference, "we have some of the finest marksmen on the East Coast stationed here. Perhaps you'd like to see some demonstrations?" Sterling's eyes lit up with interest. He was known for his competitive nature and rarely passed up an opportunity to showcase his own shooting skills. "I'd be delighted," he replied. "Set up some targets at 200 yards. I'll show these young sailors how it's done." The snow was falling more heavily now, creating challenging conditions for precision shooting. Sterling seemed pleased by this development, as it would make any demonstration more impressive. Several junior officers volunteered to participate in what had become an impromptu competition, eager to test their skills against the legendary Admiral. Sarah watched from the sidelines as the range was prepared. This was the moment she had been waiting for. As the other participants lined up, she approached Chief Rodriguez and quietly requested permission to join the shooting demonstration. Rodriguez looked surprised but nodded his approval, knowing Sarah's exceptional abilities. Sterling had just fired his first round, hitting the target dead center despite the swirling snow, when Sarah stepped forward to the firing line. The Admiral noticed her approach and paused, a slight frown crossing his face as he recognized her from her personnel file photo. "And you are?" Sterling asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, sir," she replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'd like to participate in the demonstration, if the Admiral permits." The tension on the range was palpable. Everyone present knew about Sarah's rejected SEAL application, and many sensed that this moment carried significance beyond a simple shooting demonstration. Sterling studied her for a long moment, clearly recognizing the implicit challenge in her request. "Very well, Petty Officer Martinez," he said finally. "Let's see what you can do." The snow was now falling in thick, heavy flakes, driven by gusting winds that made accurate shooting extremely difficult. The targets at 200 yards were barely visible through the white curtain of precipitation. Most of the other participants had struggled to hit their targets consistently under these conditions. Sarah approached the firing line and selected her weapon, a standard-issue M16A4 rifle that she had trained with extensively. She performed her pre-firing routine methodically, checking the weapon and adjusting for the wind and weather conditions. The assembled group watched in silence as she took her position. Lieutenant Commander Walsh stood among the observers, his hands clenched with nervous tension. He had seen Sarah shoot before and knew her capabilities, but he also understood what was at stake. If she failed under these pressure-filled circumstances, it would likely confirm Sterling's beliefs about women in combat roles. Sarah controlled her breathing and focused on the target through the scope. The snow was creating a white noise effect that actually helped her concentrate, blocking out the distractions around her. She remembered her grandfather's lessons about shooting in adverse conditions. Trust your training, control what you can control, and let everything else fade away. Her first shot rang out across the range, and the spotter confirmed a perfect center hit. The crowd stirred with impressed murmurs, but Sarah was already preparing for her second shot. She knew that one good shot could be attributed to luck. She needed to demonstrate consistency and skill that couldn't be dismissed. The second shot was another perfect hit, followed quickly by a third. Sarah had found her rhythm now, and each subsequent shot felt easier than the last. The wind patterns were becoming predictable to her trained eye, and she adjusted for each gust with practiced precision. Admiral Sterling watched with growing amazement as Sarah continued her demonstration. By the seventh shot, it was clear that she was operating on a level far above the other participants. Her technique was flawless, her composure unshakable, and her accuracy remarkable given the challenging conditions. The crowd had grown larger as word spread throughout the base about the extraordinary shooting display taking place. Sailors and officers who had heard about the demonstration began arriving at the range, creating an audience that added even more pressure to the situation. Sarah was dimly aware of the growing crowd, but her focus remained locked on the target. Each shot was a statement, a declaration of her abilities that no bureaucrat could ignore or explain away. She was shooting not just for accuracy, but for her dreams, her future, and for every woman who had been told she wasn't good enough for combat roles. Shot after shot found its mark with mechanical precision. The spotter's confirmations became routine. Center hit, center hit, center hit. Even Sterling, known for his stern demeanor, began showing signs of amazement at the display of marksmanship unfolding before him. As Sarah approached her 15th shot, the snow reached its peak intensity. The wind was howling now, and visibility was severely limited. Most shooters would have asked to postpone the demonstration under such conditions, but Sarah welcomed the challenge. This was her moment to prove that she could perform under any circumstances. She lined up her final shot with the same careful precision she had shown throughout the demonstration. The target was barely visible through the swirling snow, but Sarah trusted her instincts and her training. She controlled her breathing one final time, adjusted for the wind, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the range, and, for a moment, everyone waited in silence for the spotter's confirmation. When it came, the range erupted in spontaneous applause. Perfect center hit. Sarah had fired 15 consecutive perfect shots under some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. The demonstration had transformed from a simple shooting exercise into a powerful statement about capability, determination, and the danger of making assumptions based on gender rather than ability. Admiral Sterling stood in stunned silence, clearly processing what he had just witnessed. The other officers and sailors on the range looked at Sarah with new respect and admiration. Chief Rodriguez shook his head in amazement, having witnessed one of the finest displays of marksmanship in his 20-year career. As Sarah secured her weapon and stepped back from the firing line, she could feel the weight of everyone's attention. She had taken an enormous risk by putting herself in this position, but the gamble appeared to have paid off. The question now was whether her demonstration would be enough to change minds that had seemed set in stone. The recognition, the shooting range fell silent except for the wind whistling through the falling snow. Admiral Sterling stood motionless, staring at the target where 15 perfect bullet holes clustered in the center ring. The demonstration he had just witnessed challenged everything he thought he knew about combat readiness and gender limitations in special operations. Sarah remained at attention, her weapon secured, waiting for whatever consequences her bold demonstration might bring. She had laid everything on the line, and now there was nothing left to do but face the Admiral's response. Around her, the assembled sailors and officers waited with bated breath to see how this unprecedented moment would unfold. Sterling walked slowly toward the target, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. When he reached it, he examined the grouping closely, running his finger around the tight cluster of holes. 28 years of military service had given him an eye for exceptional marksmanship, and what he was looking at exceeded even his high standards. "Chief Rodriguez," Sterling called out, his voice carrying across the range. "In your professional opinion, how would you rate this shooting demonstration?" Rodriguez straightened to attention. "Sir, in 20 years of range operations, I have never seen anything like it. 15 consecutive center hits under these conditions is extraordinary by any measure. Petty Officer Martinez has just demonstrated some of the finest marksmanship I've ever witnessed." The Admiral nodded slowly, then walked back toward Sarah. The crowd parted as he approached, and she could see various emotions playing across his weathered face. When he stopped in front of her, she met his gaze directly, refusing to show any sign of the nervousness churning in her stomach. "Petty Officer Martinez," Sterling began, his voice measured and serious. "That was an impressive display of marksmanship. But I assume you didn't arrange this demonstration simply to show off your shooting skills." "No, sir," Sarah replied firmly. "I wanted you to see what I'm capable of before making final judgments about my suitability for special operations. My application was rejected based on policy concerns, not performance evaluations. I believe I've earned the right to prove myself through actions rather than assumptions." Sterling studied her for a long moment. The boldness of her approach could have been seen as insubordination, but her respectful demeanor and obvious competence made it difficult to dismiss her actions as mere defiance. Several of his staff officers watched nervously, uncertain about how their commander would respond to this unprecedented situation. "You took a significant risk today," Sterling said finally. "Challenging your commanding officer's decisions in such a public manner could have serious consequences for your career." "Yes, sir, I understand that," Sarah replied. "But sometimes extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary measures. I've worked too hard and come too far to accept rejection without at least trying to show what I can do." Lieutenant Commander Walsh stepped forward, sensing that this was a crucial moment for his subordinate. "Admiral, if I may," he said respectfully, "Petty Officer Martinez has been exemplary in every aspect of her service. Her rejection wasn't based on any performance deficiencies. What you just witnessed represents the kind of skill and determination that our special operations forces need." Sterling looked around at the faces surrounding him. He could see admiration for Sarah's demonstration in the eyes of the junior sailors and respect from the senior officers who had worked with her. The snow continued to fall around them, creating an almost surreal atmosphere for this career-defining moment. "Petty Officer Martinez," the Admiral said, "your shooting today was undeniably impressive. But SEAL operations require much more than marksmanship. They require the ability to function as part of a cohesive unit under the most extreme stress imaginable. The question isn't whether you can shoot straight. It's whether you can maintain unit effectiveness in life-or-death situations." Sarah felt her heart sinking. It seemed like Sterling was preparing to deliver another rejection, albeit a more personal one this time. But she had come too far to give up now. "Sir, with respect, isn't that exactly what today's demonstration showed?" she asked. "I performed under pressure, in adverse conditions, with hundreds of people watching and my career on the line. If that's not extreme stress, I don't know what is. And my performance didn't just meet standards, it exceeded them." The Admiral's expression shifted slightly, and Sarah detected what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You make a compelling point," he admitted. "Your composure under pressure today was certainly noteworthy." Chief Rodriguez spoke up again, his voice carrying the authority of decades of experience. "Sir, if I may add something, I've been watching sailors train on this range for 20 years. What Petty Officer Martinez demonstrated today isn't just about shooting ability. It's about mental toughness, preparation, and the kind of ice-cold nerve that can't be taught. Those are exactly the qualities our special operators need most." Sterling nodded thoughtfully, then turned his attention back to Sarah. "If I were to reconsider your application, what assurances could you give me that you're prepared for the physical and mental challenges of SEAL training? And, more importantly, how do I know you won't become a distraction or liability to your teammates?" The question gave Sarah hope. If Sterling was asking about assurances, it meant he was at least considering the possibility of reversing his earlier decision. She chose her words carefully, knowing that this might be her only chance to make her case. "Sir, I can't give you assurances about success because no one can guarantee that. What I can promise is that I'll give everything I have to earn my place among the teams. As for being a distraction, I believe my record speaks for itself. I've served alongside male sailors for years without incident. I've earned their respect through competence and professionalism, not by asking for special treatment." Sterling looked out across the snow-covered range, seemingly lost in thought. The gathered crowd waited in silence, understanding that they were witnessing a potentially historic moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was making a decision that would affect more than just one sailor's career. "The military is changing," he said, addressing not just Sarah, but the entire assembled group. "Sometimes that change comes from the top down, and sometimes it comes from the bottom up. Today, I've seen something that challenges my own assumptions about readiness and capability." He paused, then looked directly at Sarah. "Petty Officer Martinez, I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to reverse a previous decision based on what I've observed today. Your SEAL application will be reconsidered, and if you still meet all the other requirements, you'll be given a chance to prove yourself in training." The range erupted in spontaneous applause from the assembled sailors. Sarah felt a rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her composure. But she maintained her military bearing even as tears of relief and joy began to form in her eyes. However, Sterling continued, raising his hand for silence. "Understand that this decision comes with enormous pressure. You won't just be representing yourself. You'll be representing every woman who hopes to follow in your footsteps. The spotlight will be intense, and the expectations will be higher than for any candidate in the program's history." "I understand, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "I'm ready for that responsibility." Sterling extended his hand to her, and she shook it firmly. "I hope so, Petty Officer Martinez. I hope so." As the crowd began to disperse and the snow continued to fall, Sarah felt the weight of her achievement beginning to settle in. She had taken an enormous risk, but her 15 perfect shots in a Christmas snowstorm had opened a door that had previously been closed to her. The real work would begin now, but for the first time in months, she felt confident that her dreams were within reach. Lieutenant Commander Walsh approached her as the Admiral's entourage departed. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen a sailor do," he said with a grin. "I'm betting on brave." Sarah smiled back, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond personal victory. She had proven that sometimes the best way to change the system is to force it to confront its own limitations. As she walked back toward the base through the falling snow, she thought about her grandfather and the lessons he had taught her about persistence and precision. The rejection letter was still in her locker, but it no longer defined her future. Today, 15 perfect shots had rewritten her story, and potentially change the course of military history. The path ahead would be challenging, but Sarah Martinez was ready for whatever came next.